All right. Good evening, everyone. Good day, or wherever you might be tuning in, and welcome to another edition of Net Generation Parents Lunch and Learn, but now it's Dinner and Learn, using the magic of Zoom. My name is Carl Davies, and I work in the Player and Coach Development Department, located at Orlando, Florida, at USTA National Campus. Just a few housekeeping pieces to go over. Please put in any questions you might have in the Q&A chat box. We will get to these in the second half of the webinar, but while you're thinking of them, put them in the chat. Thank you for joining us today. We sincerely hope you get something out of this webinar and at the same time impact your child's competition experiences. Over to our host now. Unfortunately, Larry's not able to join us today. But not to worry, Dr. Shawn Foltz-Emmons is a former professional tennis player reaching a high ranking of 55 in the world. She was also a top-ranked collegiate and junior national player. Currently, Shawn is a licensed psychologist with her own business, Advantage Performance Consultants, and currently sits on our USTA Sports Science Committee. We have the privilege and honor to have a special guest with us today, Dr. Jack Groppel. Dr. Jack Groppel is a sports scientist, author, entrepreneur, consultant, lecturer, and coach. He is a co-founder of the Johnson & Johnson Human Performance Institute at Lake Nona in Orlando, Florida as well. As an internationally recognized authority and pioneer in the science of human performance, Dr. Groppel currently serves on an academic appointment as professor of kinesiology and community health at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and serves as an adjunct professor of management at the J.L. Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University for several years. In September of this year, Dr. Groppel was inducted into the Hall of Fame of the United States Professional Tennis Association. For those people who don't know, considering our parents, that is one of our coach education organizations. So that was a mouthful, Jack. Really.
I think I'm going to exit.
I'm sorry. I guess I should say I'm sorry, huh?
So moving along,
yeah,
we don't have Larry here tonight, and Larry usually provides a little bit of dry humor. Jack, would you be able to provide that role?
Well, you know, it was funny at the Hall of Fame induction. Jim Lair and I were both being inducted, and someone asked me a question about Jim and his attitude on the court, because Jim's been known to get a little angry when he plays, and he's a phenomenal. He's the #1 sports psychologist in our game, but he's hard on himself. And they asked me that question. I think the dry humor is that I'm not going to tell you what I said, but my first response was that people in glass houses shouldn't throw bricks, because I certainly, as a junior way back in the day, certainly frisbeed a few rackets of my own.
We shouldn't have started with that.
So how's that for a start, Carl?
Frisbeed.
Before we get into our questions, we just have to relay the content of this monthly webinar and the mental health resource list is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, but rather to provide general information. We seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding mental health and or a medical condition. I have to just quickly give you a shout out. I just mentioned that Shawn is on our USTA Sports Science Committee, and you were actually the founder of the Sports Science Committee.
Well, I was one of the founders. I was the founding chairman. Yes. Thank you.
How was that? Why did you start it? I mean, maybe.
Well, you know, at the time, the USTA had a sports medicine committee, but it was basically dedicated to treatment of injury. And suddenly we were in the early 80s, we were really starting to realize a lot in biomechanics and exercise physiology and nutrition, in psychology. And Jim Lair was the founding, he became a staff member, actually, director of sports science for the USTA. And we just said that the volunteer committee that oversees this and this activity really needed to be multidimensional. So the USTA decided to go from a sports medicine only to a sports science committee that included sports medicine, but but was much more robust. And I was blessed to be the founding chairman of that. So it was really, and I did that for 16 years. It was really an incredible run.
Well, congratulations for that.
Thank
I
you.
sit as a staff
It was an
member
honor.
for the sports science, and it's a great honor and privilege to be engaged with the likes of Sean and Larry and the whole team. Why are you laughing, Sean?
Well, I was just thinking that life comes full circle, right? I mean, I remember when I first started playing professionally, working with Dr. Groppel, who I can't call Jack. And now, and now here I am on the sports science committee, something that you had been a founding member of. And I think it's part of the beauty of life, in particular in this tennis community, that the relationships that you develop throughout this process of whatever you're doing, whether it's in my role as a mental health person or as a player, if you build these relationships, they do stand the test of time. And
That's
here we
right.
are.
That's right. And first of all, let me just say, let's do this full circle thing. I'm very proud of you because I have known you
Thank you.
for a long, long time. I mean, I don't know when we first met. You must have been 15 or 16.
Yeah.
When you and I first started working together. And so I had the privilege of watching you and your career and actually helping you and talking with you through the injuries that you went through. And it was, I mean, you could honestly say that you were one of the athletes that I started learning from, and because we learn from our athletes. We learn, great coaches learn from their students. And, I think that your situation, Sean, was one that I had to be on a very quick learning curve with. Early in my own career. Right now, I mean, I've got decades of work. So people are going to say, well, how do we know that? Well, you make a lot of mistakes is what you end up doing. And that's how, but you're not afraid to make a mistake. And that's one of the things that we have to talk about if we're going to develop players.
Right. Is being able to learn from those and grow, right? Not to stick with them and focus on the mistakes, but frame it as a learning experience and then kind of build on that.
Right.
I don't know how you feel, Sean. I feel quite relaxed now, knowing that we're going an hour today. We usually, used to our 30 minutes firestorm question. So let's get right into it. Jack, you are working with two high school tennis players currently. Please, can you discuss a little bit of your journey with them? Because we think that it's going to really set the scene or the foundation of our discussion tonight.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's two sisters, actually, and they play. I'm a volunteer coach for a local high school where I live. And I started working with the older sister. She's 17 when she was a sophomore. And her doubles partner then was a senior, not her sister. And I was able to start working with her and her doubles partner, and they did pretty well. They won their sectional tournament, and they did okay at the state tournament. And then the next year, the older sister, who then was 16, her baby sister was 14, a freshman. And the baby sister was a player. The baby sister was really, really good, is really, really good. And the bigger sister's good, but the little sister can really pound a ball. So I started working with them then. And they won the sectional, and they did a little bit better. They got third in the state. So they set their sights early that they wanted to win the state championship. That was their goal. And so the parents called me in July of this year and they said, Jack, we really want to hunker down and really help the girls. So can you work with them? And I said, yeah. So we started working together, and day one, I'd gotten to know the parents but I wanted to make sure the relationship was really solid. So I started out by saying, look, there's no guarantees that you can win the tournament, that you can win the state championships. There's no guarantees in our game. That's why you've got to play all the matches. I said, but what we need to do is train to ensure that we control all the variables we're in control of, or you're in control of. I'm the coach, you're the player. So the variables we talked about, how they're going to train, how they're going to hit every ball with a purpose. What's the role of the parents? I spent time with the mom and the dad privately, just talking about the game, talking about the girls, talking to the girls about pressure that they felt. The older sister was a senior. This was her last shot. I mean, in many ways, she had a lot more pressure than the little sister. And so I really developed in August and early September, just developed the relationship. I went to workouts. They worked really hard together. We worked on a lot of doubles drills and, just fundamentals. I'm all about basics. I mean, if you can do the basics well, if you've got good skill and you can do the basics well, you can probably do pretty well in our game if you keep your head on straight. So sure enough, they won their conference and they got into the sectional tournament, and there was something that started happening. They were doing well. They were seeded number 1. And in the semifinals, I'm watching this match and they're winning. And then all of a sudden they started like scowling at each other and they started bickering. And I go up to the fence. And I remember I've tried to set all the standards on relationships, communication. And I walked up to the back of the fence and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, one of them looked at the other and says, "Well, she keeps telling me that I need to start doing this." And so the little sister started coaching the big sister. The big sister didn't want to handle it. And I'm going, "All right, guys, look, stop. Just stop for a second. Take a deep breath. Try to work this out right now. Your guys are winning the match. Get through this and then we'll talk about it. But you guys have got to stop the bickering. You can't get too emotionally connected to each other right now." So they pulled out the match. And we immediately debriefed and I let them talk. I said, "What do you guys think happened?" And mom and dad are there too, but they're in the background. Mom and dad are allowed to be involved to watch, but not to play a role, because now I'm the coach, they're mom and dad. And by the way, for everybody watching, I've got a son that's a national champion in another sport. He doesn't play tennis. And so there's another whole story there as to why I'm not his tennis coach. But anyway, so we started talking and it basically net was that I said, "Guys, you guys, you're sisters, you love each other, but that's the problem. You love each other. So you're going to bicker and you get upset and you play old sister, big sister, little sister, big sister, and you got to stop it. When you're playing tennis, you're doubles partners. Doubles partners don't really bicker at each other." So I really set a boundary that you guys love each other, but when you're playing a match, you've got to be doubles partners. So we started rehearsing that. What's this going to look like? And how are you going to speak to your big sister? Big sister, how are you going to speak to little sister when she approaches you? We rehearsed it. We talked about it. And then they played beautifully in the finals. It was a little bit of a tough match, but they did well. Then they got to the state championships and they blew through the first few rounds. They did really well. And in the semifinals, I'd gone through all the training with the Illinois State High School Association. So I was an official coach, so I could be, and they wanted me in the chair with them, which was really a joy. I mean, I will tell you, it's one of the true gratitudes I have of being a coach in my career, is to really be in that moment, the heat of that moment with the athletes. And the semifinals, they were nervous. They were both nervous because this was a shot, and they had been undefeated. They had played so well and in their division, and they were nervous. So we were able, but we had created safety, and that's something, Sean, you and I can talk about probably a lot more. But what I tried to do was create a safe environment for them to express to me when they were nervous. I would not belittle it. I would respect and honor it, and then we would deal with it. So that they felt they could talk to me when they felt nervous, when they were upset, if they felt there was a bad call, if they felt something was going on, if spectators were, because there were a lot of people there when you're at this stage of a big state tournament like this. And they did well in the semifinals, won the match, and now they're playing the number 2 seed. And they think they can beat them, but again, we kind of debrief, we prepare. My whole thing is, it's about playing well. If you play well, winning and losing will take care of itself. So the mom and I talked that night how their whole school was busing the entire school to the state championship match, and we know it's going to be chaos. So we're talking how they're going to warm up, what's their food, the water, air control, all the controllables. And then they had a great warm up, and then the girls decided to get their earphones in and go to the car, not be around because all their kids are going, all their buddies are going, you got this, you're going to win this, no problem today, go get it. That's all they hear. And you can't be a competitor when that's going on. So we were able to sequester them, and with their willingness, we weren't forcing them to do anything they didn't want to do. And then they came out, and I was with them on the match, in the match, and there were some tough moments. I mean, they were nervous. At one changeover, the older sister said, "I'm shaking. I'm literally shaking right now. I'm so nervous." I said, "Good. Thank you for telling me. Now let's deal with this." And we were able to, it was all grounded in what we were in control of. And at one point I had to get kind of tough on one of them. They lost 2 or 3 points in a row, and they made some easy mistakes. They started sulking. And I literally said, I covered my mouth so nobody else could hear me, but I said, "You will not hang your head." But that's a life skill. I wasn't knocking them in tennis. And I said, "Don't hang your head. You will not hang your head. You will have the walk of the confident fighter." That was one of the things we talked about all the time. And sure enough, they went and they won the state championship. They became the first African-American girls doubles team to ever win the state championship, and they were undefeated. Their school is going to be hanging a really monstrous banner in their honor at one of the half times of the basketball games coming up. And it was just true joy.
Yeah, maybe a follow-up question to that is a great story, by the way. What's the parent influence there? I know you spoke a lot about your coaching role there, and great insights, because we do have coaches on this call as well. What did you notice there with the parent angle there? What advice? You spoke a lot about the players being very nervous. I guess we hear a lot of our questions coming in with these webinars about stress and anxiety around playing tennis. Any insights there for the parents within that story?
Yeah, I just like I talked to the players, I tried to create a safe environment for the parents so that they trusted me. And in fact, I did a clinic with them about 2 weeks ago, and I thanked the parents publicly for trusting me with their children. Because I mean, when you're a coach, you have a really respected position, and it's development of the human being in our sport. Parents have the role of development of that human being in life, but the coach plays that role, applying it to life, but through our sport. And there's a separation. So I was able to create a very safe environment for the players, but I was also able to create a very safe environment for the parents, so that they could talk to me and they could share something. And then they respected, it was a two-way street of respect that we were able to work together on. How do we help these girls in all the controllables? We talked about what the uncontrollables might be, but how do we control everything that we can? And we were all a team.
You speak about some things that are just so vital, Dr. Groppel, about creating a sense of safety. I mean, that's going to bring out the best in people, in particular athletes and parents, and developing the relationship with them as the coach is also necessary, because sometimes you may have to have hard conversations with the parents, to help teach them how to support their child differently. And it doesn't mean you're knocking them and being judgmental, but it's also part of guiding and teaching. I mean, the role of a coach is just, it's so difficult.
It's so true. And the idea of safety is a really, it's so powerful, because, we if you think about the human being, the person on the tennis court, and Sean, you experienced this as a player at a very high level, but you're all by yourself. Right. And if we don't learn how to create that internal safety within the athlete's own being, I mean, they really do get nervous. They act out. So there's not a safety for the internal environment of the person. Then the external environment, if it's not safe, that's why I'm talking about, you've got to control all the controllables. And that's why communication, the coaches, the parents, the athletes, constant communication. The worst that can ever happen is that there's no communication.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like what you recommend, or how you operate, is that the roles of parent, player, or athlete, and coach are well defined. Everyone knows what their role is, but there's also links, there's a collaboration. So everybody's on the same team. You're all working together to help this child develop through sport. But there's clear roles.
And there's clear boundaries.
Yeah.
There's very clear boundaries as well, if you do a great job in the communication. But I think that's on the coach, and it's on the parents. I think if the parents are hiring the coach to be a great coach, and then that onus is on the coach to help create that relationship so the parents feel safe with
Yeah.
that boundary. So, because I respect the fact that I've got a son, as I say, he competed in another sport, and the parent, I don't, if he asked me questions about competing, I certainly would answer, but I was in the shadow.
You're the
Yeah,
parent.
you could argue I could step in and be as involved as I want to be, but I wasn't, because I wanted to be his parent. I didn't want to be his coach.
You know, I think that kind of segues into what is a high performing parent. That's part of what our discussion is today. And I think what you describe is that you put the child first. You know, you paid attention and valued the parent-child relationship first, because that's what they are first, as a child, and second, they're an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back. It might sound a little bit corny when I first say it, but it comes back to love. I mean, everybody loves their children. I mean, I love my child with all my heart, you know, and we love our children, and then we want the best for them. But these almost become the words out of our mouth. Our actions and our behaviors sometimes don't mimic those, because
Right.
if it is love, first of all, you don't care whether they win or lose a competition. Honestly, folks, I mean, I care about everybody. I care about this sport to the nth degree. I have no idea. But one of the biggest problems that players face is they care too much. The only reason players get nervous, this is for all the parents watching, the only reason athletes choke or get nervous is, one, they care too much about winning or losing, or two, they care too much about what other people think about them. And if that's going on in their brains, like, what's mom and dad think? It's one of the worst things possible for a competitor, because so they have to be safe that it's okay if you lose. It's okay if you lose. And that's hard, because we want them, you know, our culture is driven by quote unquote winning. And by the way, no one will more reinforce the concept of learning how to win with grace and lose with honor. Losing doesn't mean you lose your honor. Losing means you just lost a match. What we have to do is learn. Our culture has not developed this, and our sport could do this, where we learn how to win with grace. We don't need to put that in somebody's face. We can win with grace, but then we can lose with honor and be better because we lost, and learn from that loss. So losing isn't about our identity. Problem is that self-esteem of the child starts getting intermeshed in whether they win or lose. And it's really hard to get out of that tunnel when you've gotten there.
Yeah. Oh, what you say is so important. I mean, when anybody, whether it's an athlete or somebody who is academically excelling in academics or in some form of music or an instrument, if their identity or their competence or their self-worth is based on whether they win or lose, then and they carry that with them throughout life, and it creates problems. So I think what you also allude to is that we need to redefine what success is. Right? Success is not based on the W. Success is based on the character of the child. It's how they problem solve, how they resolve conflict, how they win with grace and lose with honor.
How they self-regulate, how they handle pressure to self-regulate under a crisis, because tennis is a game of emergencies. I mean, if you're really, and I did this with the girls when I was working with them, I said, it's a game of emergencies. Your goal is to create a bigger emergency for your opponent than your opponent creates for you. That's your goal. Create a bigger emergency for them, you know, than they're creating for you. And then you're going to be a winner. You'll be a winner, but create an emergency, you know, work. So you improve your movement, you improve your striking skills, you improve your self-regulation, you improve how you manage mistakes, you improve your strength, your fitness, you know, and so on. And it just becomes a matter of, you may not be number one in the world, but you may be number one in somebody's heart someday because you've got such high character.
Right. You know, it makes me think of Nick Bollettieri, who recently passed away.
Changed our game.
Yeah, I mean, he was a master. I remember I did a movie with Carleen Bassett called Spring Fever, and
I remember clearly.
Yeah, still on YouTube. And Nick would he was very involved with the movie. Carlene Bassett had just started at this
Right.
academy. Her dad was really involved. Anyway, Nick would bus students in to be extras in the crowd. And he offered me a scholarship to go to his tennis academy the following year, which catapulted me into what I am today. And, I am so grateful for the opportunities and people along the way. But the thing that Nick always focused on keeping things simple. He always focused on parents. You got to be careful. This is your child, the child that plays tennis. But he was also very good with the parents. And my mom, even too, she passed away in October, but every time I went to the US Open or I was involved in some tennis, in some way in tennis, she would ask, have you seen Nick? Please tell him I said hi. He would always ask how she was. I mean, this man revolutionized tennis. But if you look at kind of the deeper meaning behind what he did, he created a sense of fun. And most of the people that I went to the academy with, I'm still friends with today, and we all had our different experiences there and after, but he was a master at really working with the parents to be realistic about their children and also to keep things in perspective.
It's fascinating to talk about Nick right now and sort of just live his legacy for just a moment, because, and let's call it, I mean, Nick, certainly any famous person has their critics. Nick had his critics, but you must tip your hat to what that man was capable of doing and what he did for our game. You must tip your hat that he was a master motivator, and he knew how to he changed our game. He changed how we view our game, how we train athletes, how we do things. And no matter what you think of him, he changed our game for the better. And that's really important to realize.
Yeah. So Carl, we've kind of taken over.
That's okay. Okay.
You want to?
You understand, we've known each other 3.5 decades. So this...
we've covered a lot already.
Yeah.
If I could just jump in there quickly, Sean, we've got 2 questions that have come in through the Q&A. I did mention we were going to go cover the questions in the latter part of the session, while we're actually drawing upon the latter part, and they center around the same thing, Jack, going backwards a little bit. The questions center around, some parents take on this role as a coach. They're going to all of the matches, the practices, and feel like they just want to support their child. How do you see this, this parent-coach dynamic, where the parent is chipping in with a little bit of advice or coaching? How do you see that? What's a great relationship or some tips around that?
Well, it's a very delicate balance. It's a very delicate balance. Let me just start with that. And I think I need to tell my own story and then give a rationale for what I recommend for people. My own story is that my son's adopted from China. I'm obviously an older father. He's 17 years old. And when he started really getting involved, he could throw a spiral football 30, 40 yards when he was 7 years old. I mean, the kid is an athlete. And I said, buddy, if you ever, and I literally said these words, if he walked in here right now into my den, I'd verify it. I said, buddy, would you like to play tennis? And he just kind of looked at me. I said, because if you do, I said, I'll hire somebody to teach you. And he looked at, he's seen all the pictures and he knows my background, and he's going, Daddy, why wouldn't you teach me? I said, you know what I said? Because I want to be your dad. I'll hire somebody to be your tennis teacher and tennis coach. I want to be your dad. Because over all the decades of work that I've done in the game, I've seen it is possible to be a parent and a coach, but it's a very fine, delicate balance. And so let me go a little further. Being a coach where you have to correct a stroke, and being a parent where you've got to help them understand why they can't go to sleep at night. These are not the same. These are not the same. So here you are lovingly trying to help this young child go to sleep at night. And now the next day you go on the court and you're saying, look, you got to move your feet. You got to hit that ball more in your strike zone. And suddenly it becomes a blur to the child. This becomes a blur, everyone, because they can't perceive especially young in youth, they can't perceive this loving person that's teaching me self-regulation on my life skills, and this person that's trying to help me hit a tennis ball better.
Right.
Because let's face it, to be a really good coach, you've got to be pretty assertive to get them to do what you need them to do. And parents, you have to be assertive to get them to do what you need to do. But they're very, very different. And when you step into the arena of sport, this is the exact reason why I said to my son, Bud, I will hire a great tennis coach to coach you because I want to be your dad. And he went on to win a national championship, 14 and under in AAU karate. And his sensei and I became very close friends. His sensei knows my background. His sensei and I would go to lunch and we would talk about mental toughness. But when my son was in the dojo or my son was winning the national championship, I was in the crowd because I had that boundary. I had that self-imposed boundary that I hired his sensei to be his coach. And I trusted his sensei to be his coach. And now if he asked me a question, like, what do you think about this? Or how should I prepare? I'll do it from a parent's perspective, not from a coach's perspective. And even to this day, my son, he's playing basketball right now, and he got his shin bruised pretty hard last night. And I said, why don't you grab a bag of ice and sit down and just have a chat with your dad? Yeah, I mean, I did it kind of funny. Really, what I was saying as a coach, you need to ice that dude, but I didn't say it like that. You see what I'm getting at? It was, I did cross the boundary, but I did it in a loving way as his dad, not telling him, buddy, you got to ice that because you got to play tomorrow. I'm not going to play that role. So the idea of parent as coach is one where first of all, I wouldn't do it. I mean, I care about everybody watching because obviously you care enough that you're watching this. And I'm just telling you flat out testimonial, I wouldn't do it. And yet I've had the great fortune to coach some of the top players in the world. And I've worked very closely with their parents. And yes, I've had difficult relationships with parents over the years. And we don't even need to go into that. But and Sean, you're laughing, but I know what I'm talking about. And not Sean's parents, by the way. I loved them and I got to meet her mom. Bless your heart. I'm so sorry. You have my deepest sympathies.
Thank you.
Your mother. I met your mom and but it's about the relationship that you develop. That's the key. And so I hope that's helpful, Carl, with your answer. I may have danced around it, but I tried to give as straight an answer as I could.
No, well received. Thank you. Over to you, Sean.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about, Dr. Groppel, I know you've written a number of books on various topics. And I'm wondering, do you have anything that you're comfortable talking about that may be coming down the pipeline?
Oh, that's interesting. I am working on a new consulting kind of a concept. Well, you remember, well, your audience may not know this, but 5 years ago, my son, when he was 12 years old, and I have artificial knees, by the way, so let me kind of preface all that because of I just beat my body up so badly. I've got artificial knees now. But with artificial knees and a 12-year-old son, we summited Mount Kilimanjaro. And I took that experience and I'm actually going to I'm making a consulting company around how do you face all the barriers in your life. And we're going to be announcing that in the first quarter of next year. Thank you for asking, by the way. I didn't see that coming. But I'm also working in a field called neuroliteracy. I'm working on some new projects there on how the brain works and how we can change. I've been in the behavior change business my whole life. So I'm, even though I'm a little bit along in years, I'm still doing all the creativity things I always wanted.
I am curious. I'm not the brain and its anatomy and how it functions is probably the weakest part of my clinical skills, but I do know that like the most of the parents or coaches that we have on our webinar, they have minor kids or young athletes, and knowing that a child's brain is very plastic, and so basically it's thirsty, so whatever we give them, they're going to drink up and they're going to believe and they're going to use, and it's going to nourish them. So a big part of what we talk about throughout our webinars is this overall wellness concept, right? Like you have to have balance in your life with all spheres of life, but also too is to be positive or positive neutral with your kids, in particular when coming off a match or before a match or during a match. And I think in part people are curious about why we focus on this positive aspect, right? It sounds kind of hokey, but I think when you take it a little bit deeper, what we're doing is we're really setting the child's brain up by being positive. We're laying down these neural pathways that are so very important for them in terms of problem solving and in terms of regulation and in terms of being able to communicate. And so I don't know, I wanted to say that, but also, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're spot on. You're spot on. I mean,
Yeah.
getting the neuroscience of all this, you're constantly rewiring pathways. So if this is where why did I say to a young girl on the tennis court, you do not hang your head, you're not going to sulk,
Right.
and keep your head up. I mean, I want her to respond to adversity with that style, not in the sulking style. So it's literally, we understand in the animal kingdom there's imprinting, there's
Right.
there's all these things where ducklings follow their mother. We've been studying this for centuries almost. The idea that role modeling, and if we allow things to go a certain way, and that's where the role of the parent is, this self-regulation role to help them understand anxiety in general. The coach's role is to help nervousness on the tennis court. And those are different. General anxiety in life is very different than anxiety because I'm afraid I'm going to win or lose a tennis match. Those are very different things. And if those boundaries start crossing, the brain can't interpret that. And the best word picture I can give you, Sean, just to go a little bit deeper, and you've probably heard this story, and if you haven't, it's kind of fun. So I hope your audience enjoys this. But when Jim Lair and I had the business before we were acquired by Johnson & Johnson, we had all the pro football players come to train with us before the combine. So we had all these monstrous football players showing up and training. And one guy I remember, 6'6", 300 pounds, offensive tackle, and he says, I said, what are you going to do? Tell me what goes on in your mind. I love asking athletes this. What goes on in your mind when you see a big linebacker blitzing right at you? He looked at me, he goes, I'm going to fold him in half. And I'm going, okay, dude, that's an attitude. That's an attitude. So we had 4 guys one day, and they were all full of themselves. And we decided intentionally we were going to do this little experiment with them. So we said, guys, we want you to jog out this trail behind our property in Orlando and jog out toward the airport. And just jog a mile out at the 1 mile marker, a white fence comes out to the trail. Your mission is to just touch the white fence and jog back. And they're going, that's all we have to do? Yeah, we just need you to cool down, just a cool down run. Just go out 9-minute mile. It's easy. You're a world-class athlete. So they get down and start putting their running shoes on. We go, okay, guys, now we're going to have rules of engagement. You're going to be running through a swamp, and there's a canal by the trail. Alligator migrate in and out of the canal. Keep your eyes open. And they start looking at each other and they go, and guys, it's sunny outside. You're in Florida. Poisonous snakes will be sunning themselves. So if you see a snake coiled up on the trail, don't get nervous. Just go around. The snake won't bother you, but just don't get cute. Just go around it. Now they're looking at each other. Why are we doing this? And they get to the front of the door, and we had our stopwatch and go, oh, guys, I'm so sorry. We forgot to tell you. Just yesterday, we sighted some wild boar out there. Now, these wild boar will attack you unprovoked. But here's your mission. Here's your mission while you're running. If you encounter a wild boar, you must take appropriate action. But above all else, you must complete the mission. What's the mission, guys? Touch the white fence. Okay, ready, go. They took off. And they're nervous. I mean, they're the bugs. You can hear them, see them doing this. Well, about several hundred yards down the trail, they didn't know it. Unbeknownst to them, 2 of our team members are hiding in the bushes. So here come these monstrous football players jogging. And one of our team members leaned over and grabbed a small bush and goes real loud. They screamed at the top of their lungs and ran all the way back to the institute. Now, what's the whole point of this? Because the next week we did it with FBI hostage rescue agents, and we did the very same thing. When they heard the noise, they squared off. They had the attitude, if this is the hand that's dealt me, bring it on. So what creates the response to stress? Well, the athletes had never trained like that. The FBI agents had trained like that to approach the unknown. So the idea is that in the brain, there's structures, and there's a structure in the middle of the brain called an amygdala. Usually when you get input, it goes into the amygdala processing, and then there goes output to the rest of the brain. So a very well-developed brain in training in that pattern, the FBI, for example, they had trained in these unknowns. They had a very healthy response. They squared off, and they had the attitude, okay, if I have to, and by the way, what the funny part of this, when they squared off, the guy holding the camera who was hiding behind the bushes, you could hear him go, what if they brought their guns? So it changed everything. It was a 180. But what happened with the football players? Here's what I want to ask the parents. There was no wild boar in the bushes, but in their brains, how big was the wild boar in their brains, everybody?
Right.
Friends, this was Hogzilla, biggest wild boar known to humankind, but it wasn't there. See, this is what we end up doing. We end up creating wild boar in the bushes that aren't really there. And if we don't teach them how to handle all these things, because what happened with the football players, that was an amygdala hijacking. There was no processing. They heard that stimulus and they were gone. And that's what happens in sport if we don't train the right way. So if the child feels pressure, you're not going to get a performance out of them. So the parent has to perform. To come back to the title of your webinar for this series, the parent has to perform at a high level by literally being the loving parent, not necessarily being the authoritarian coach or the coach that has to get a work output done. So I hope that story is helpful in demonstrating that point.
It's funny.
It is
Can
funny.
I jump in there? That's funny.
Sure.
That's a great example. Just to add a little bit of context, we've had a few questions come in there, Jack, around this same, and you put it, this example is perfect, that cross between practice and then matches. There seems to be this scenario where, in the example in the question was that has a daughter that's very good at practice, but then when it comes to matches,
Yeah, it happens all the
kind of
time.
like all falls to pieces.
Right.
So if you could just add on top of that with a bit of context around that story.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. There's two avenues I want to go down. One, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And if you don't learn how to practice under pressure, you won't be able to perform under pressure. So, and parents have to be careful here, because I'm not saying the parent should create pressure in practice. That's up to the coach. But I'm a big believer. When I coached at the University of Illinois, I was the men's coach for several years, and the athletes wanted to have challenge matches. I said, all right, play 2 out of 3 tiebreakers. And they hated that, Sean. I mean, because now suddenly, wait a minute, tiebreakers, what? I'm going, yeah, let's have a little pressure. And there was a whole purpose to me doing that, was perform on demand, perform under pressure, so that's one avenue. The second is coming back to what I said earlier, practices really well, doesn't compete very well. You gotta start talking. And I put a lot of the coaches have to ask a lot of the why questions, and then we've got to be quiet. Parents and coaches, one of the best questions we ever ask is why, but then the next thing after why is just listen. Listen, don't talk. See, we as parents and coaches, we love our students, we love our children, but we never learn how to listen. And this is where the child has to kind of run the show a little bit. But they don't even know how to run the show. They've got to be safe. That if you say, well, why do you think you're not playing well in the matches? You practice great. Why are you not playing well? I mean, I had a really great friend growing up, and this is my own, I'll tell on myself. I never beat him in a practice match. Ready for this? He never beat me in a tournament match. I couldn't beat him in practice though. And I tried. It wasn't like I wasn't trying, but he couldn't beat me in a tournament. And for whatever reason, we'll go to our graves with that concept for each other every time we're together. And so the idea that why do you think you struggle, you're not doing as well in matches, and let them talk, because it will come around that they feel pressure, and maybe, by the way, they put the pressure on themselves. This could be self-imposed pressure. So the parents and the coaches have to be a team to help relieve that. Because
Mhm.
the ideal that we're after is that the athlete is his or her best self when they walk on the tennis court. The best self shows up. That doesn't mean they win, but they're the best self. And as parents, you want your children to grow up and be their best self when they go into society. As coaches, nothing rewards a coach greater than when that child graduates and says, "Thank you, coach." There's nothing more important than those two things. For the parents to hear their children contribute to society, and for the coach to hear their kids thanking them later on in life. And I think that's our goal. But again, we asked why. So if and there's other athletes that they can't play very well, but I mean, practice very well, but they play great. And they love that sense of competition. Maybe they need to compete in games a little bit more in practice. Maybe the one that practices really well but doesn't compete well, maybe they need to understand how they need to develop that safety in practice so that they can be okay to make mistakes. So it's got like, it's almost like I would say to the girls that I was just working with that won the state championship, that when we were working together in workouts, it was a mistake center. I said, I want you to make every mistake right now. Make all the mistakes. Make them all so we can work on them. But make a mistake. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. That was the key.
Yeah, I wonder too if and we've talked about this before, about that the pressure that our athletes or children put on themselves can be relieved somewhat by having a balance, right? Like making sure that they spend time with their friends, that they do non-tennis or non-sports related activities, that they have time to just kind of be. And
yeah, the idea of recovery, the idea of recapturing energy. Again, at the end of the day, we did a lot of research on this when I was the chairman of the USTA Sports Science Committee. That you think about it, parents, what's the value of a child? The value system of a child, of a young child, the value system is fun. That's all they want to do is have fun. When they're teenagers, they want to have fun and they want to have their friends. Then we get to be adults and we care about work. Now we care about our professional life a little bit more. When you get to be older, a senior, for example, now you care about your spirituality because you start to realize your own mortality. I mean, it's fascinating in the lifespan how, in general, our value systems change. And we've got to start matching values. So kids have to have fun. If they're not having fun, it's going to be, I mean, we shouldn't expect a whole lot out of them if they're not having fun. And I'm not talking about giggling and laughing all the time, but joy, the actual joy. I mean, the average prepubescent child laughs up to 500 times a day. By the time we're 25 years of age, we only laugh about 15. What's happened? What's happened? Because we've been taught, wipe that smile off your face. Don't have fun. You're not supposed to have fun. You're be a grown-up now. When in fact, why can't we have fun when we're older? Why can't we? Because we can't specialize in a sport so much that we're not enjoying life. You got me kind of preaching right now, Dr. Emmons. I don't know.
Profound. I'm glad we're recording this.
Sean, could I come in
this is
with
helpful.
one? Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Sorry.
What other questions do we have? Yeah.
Yeah. Through this one, we got to get through. One of them was fun, which you just tackled, Jack.
Yeah.
Throughout our webinars, we've actually dedicated certain webinars. We're hearing a lot about, how can I help my child when there's cheating going on? We get that a lot. That seems to be a common scenario, I guess you could come in around competition. Any thoughts or any advice that you could share, both with our parents and coaches?
Yeah. So this is a profound issue in life. This isn't necessarily just for tennis. This is in life. There are unfair situations that happen throughout our lives. Every parent out there, every adult out there can talk about something unfair that has happened in their lifetime, and they've had to handle it. They weren't able to correct it possibly, but they had to handle it. And I believe that the same thing is true in this situation. Cheating will happen. It's not a matter of if it happens, it's how are you going to handle it? How will you self-regulate when it happens? And again, I abhor it. I abhor dishonesty. I abhor cheating, but it will happen. So I had a strategy. When I started coaching at Illinois, I realized that this is something that we've got to deal with. So I started developing this way of thinking and preparing for when the event happens. And then I've worked with players throughout, and I just was working with the girls, the high school team that I was just working with as well. Very same strategy. And it is that you prepare in your mind what you're going to do, how you're going to handle it. So the first time, now the danger of this, what I'm going to say is if it happens on set point. If it happens on set point, you just lost the set. I'm sorry it happened, but you lost the set. I'm sorry, but you did. You lost the set. They took it from you. Yes, it's not fair, but it happened. But we as parents have to role model how we have to deal with unfairness in life. And so here's what I've always done with players. First time it happens, you ask the opponent, are you sure of your call? So you let them know that you're questioning their call. They might be obnoxious. They might say, of course, they might blow you off. It's not your problem. You don't react to them emotionally. You rehearse. I rehearse this with all my players, everybody. I rehearse this. So are you sure of your call? Okay. I don't necessarily agree, but okay. The second time it happens, are you sure of your call? I think you're mistaken. Should we get a line person? Then the third time, you don't even say a word. You just ask for a lines person immediately. But you stay calm and you stay within yourself and you have a plan for how you're going to handle an unfair situation. Now, some people might not want to wait for 3 times. Some people might say on the second time, I'm going to do that. But my point is prepare for it. Don't just say, I've seen children work themselves into a frenzy because they're going to play somebody they've got a reputation, and they work themselves into a frenzy because they know they're going to get cheated at some point, and they can't even. This is not joy, everyone. This is not joy. So you can be in a match against somebody we used to call them pushers. They'd never miss a ball. I hated playing somebody like that, but I had to develop an attitude to compete with somebody like that. You have to develop an attitude that I played a match in the juniors one year. I'll never forget in St. Louis. The ball was in by this far and I was called out and I almost flipped out. I probably did flip out, but I was only 16, but now I'm a little bit different. But I mean, it happens. And we as coaches, we know, so we have so much technology and knowledge now on how to psychologically handle these stressors that we didn't have when I was young. When I was young, it was suck it up, or you'll get over it, or go the other way and just get so angry and flip out. It was both ends of the continuum. It was either totally be basically calm and almost check out versus fight. So it was fight or flight. And now we have a technology available that we know how the brain works, that if you can prepare for all this ahead of time, the athlete will not only handle that situation well, they'll start handling a lot of difficulties later in life very, very well.
Sean, we have about enough time for one more question. Do you want to do the honors? Last question.
All right. Oh, I'm going to combine like 5. No.
Okay. That's a tough question.
No. I think part of what we get from parents and from coaches are a need for some like practical tips, just like you gave, sort of a step-by-step process of how to do something. So for example, we've talked about a number of conceptual themes today, but the practical piece hopefully will be some takeaways that they can implement right away. And so in terms of some practical tips, could you talk to our parents and coaches about how to prevent burnout, or how to keep a player motivated, or how do you talk to a parent if you feel like the parent is too involved or acting as if they're a helicopter parent? And so I'm going to throw one more in there. What are some tips to becoming a high-performing parent as well as a high-performing player?
Okay, let's do them all real quickly. Burnout. How do you prevent burnout? You build recovery into the. I'm talking about the athlete now. Parents can take in this too, because we have adults that are burning out like crazy as well. you've got to build recovery into your life. And I'm a big believer in a 24-hour cycle of recovery. So you build 24 hours. When are you going to sleep? When are you going to be with your friends? When are you going to train? When are you going to study? When is school? How are your meals? And you start looking at, you can't just be intense. See, what we have learned in life is to just go like this. And this, by the way, will answer the motivation question. You cannot skim across the surface of life like a rock, a pebble across a pond. You've got to do this. You've got to enjoy the highs and then let yourself recover, and then get the high again, the intensity, then let yourself recover. That's everything. The brain works like this. The heart works like this. Muscles contract, but that's not how we live our life. We live our life like this. We're just linear, and you will burn out. So that's for everybody. And that's our sport teaches that, by the way. Stress, recovery in between points, stress, recovery. So our sport you can learn a lot from our sport and oscillate. How to stay motivated, find joy in everything that you do. Now, that's not the laughing kind of joy. It's a fulfillment joy. Do you wake up in the morning and say, I can't wait to hit a tennis ball today? Or do you wake up and go, oh my gosh, they're going to make me play tennis? I mean, for me, those are indicators that you've got to try to understand. It's not like my son. He decided he wanted to be a fighter. When he got involved in karate, everybody, he hated sparring. He hated it. He had to gradually get into it. His sensei and I talked about it. He gradually, and then he becomes a national champion. But he hated it at first. And we've got to understand, you've got to bring people along slowly with oscillation, not linearity. So too involved, I mean, parents, I just encourage you. You're the parent. It's a full-time job. Coaches, it's a full-time job. You've got to make sure you're in your jobs, and then communicate so that the child feels safe in all situations. If we start tipping into the arena where the child gets confused, again, I go back to what I said earlier. You're helping this child, this human being that you love, that you brought into the world, about sleep, something like sensitive and intimate as that. And now you're trying to help them hit a forehand. I mean, that gets confusing in their brains.
Right.
So you've got to understand the involvement there. How to be a high-performing parent, know your role. High-performing coach, know your role. Player, know your role. You know you're responsible for. You advocate for yourself. Parents, you need to advocate with your coaches, but talk to them. The athlete may not need to be involved in some conversations. The night before the state championship match with the girls I just talked about, I had a conversation with the mom that the girls were not involved in. It was just she and I. And it had nothing to do with the girls. And then the girls we brought into the conversation the next day, their role and my role. And we had boundaries, and we were able to create a really healthy, high-performing environment for the athletes. At the end of the day, it's about the development of the athlete.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. It's been such an honor and such a privilege.
Thank you very much, Jack. We really appreciate it. Thanks to all the audience and their questions. We tried to cover as many as we could. The questions that came in pre-registration or through the registration and today. My two takeaways, and I'll go to you next, Sean, is the white fence with the 6'6", 350-pound football player probably screaming his head off or running away from the boar.
The wild boar.
Yeah, the wild boar. And the practical tips around the cheating, I think, were very valuable, particularly from my perspective. Sean?
Oh gosh, how do I pick two takeaways? I think knowing your role is important. Really paying attention to what those boundaries are between parent, coach, and player. I think sometimes parents are in a situation where they end up being the coach by default, whether they're a coach on the high school team and their child plays on it. And I think that's a precarious position, but I think Dr. Groppel spoke very clearly about the fact that you got to keep in mind what your role is. And if that's the default situation, then pay attention and be very clear about when you're mom and when you're when you're coach. But if you can, keep those roles separate, because I agree, it's too confusing for the child. They can't differentiate
No, they can't.
when they're that young. They don't have the critical thinking ability. And then another one is being a warrior. I don't know if that was our discussion prior to the recording or prior to the webinar or during the webinar, but I think, you know, you have to act as if, meaning if you want to be a warrior, if you want to be tough, you've got to act as if before you truly believe it wholeheartedly. And mental toughness is something that comes when you pay attention to your mental health, when you pay attention to your physical health, your spiritual health, as well as your family health. So anyway, I could go on, but
I'm going to give the last remarks to Jack. Yeah, just again, thanks to all our audience. A recording will be sent out to all that have registered. Happy holidays, everyone, and we'll look forward to continuing our webinar series next year. So have a safe and fruitful holidays, and then over to you, Jack, for last comments. And
Well,
thank
I want to thank you, Carl. Thank you, Sean. Everybody, I've gotten to know Sean over decades, and she was a world-class player. And you're fortunate to have her working with the USTA Sports Science Committee and as a resource for all of you. But here's my hope for everybody watching this webinar right now, for the coaches, the parents, if there's any juniors or athletes out there watching, my hope for all of you, you watch this again, but my hope for all of you is that you touch the white fence in your life.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
That's
Say that
awesome. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.